Hello and welcome to a Christmas special episode of Virtual Coffee with Ashish. I've got two of my favorite people here talking about podcasting. Why podcasting? Because last year around this time I got inspired to do a podcast and hence Virtual Coffee for Ashish. And this year I thought, why not get two more people who've done an amazing job of creating a podcast community, a podcast which is giving information and value to a much larger audience. So why not, right? So if you guys are here to learn about how to be creating a successful podcast, a cybersecurity podcast, this is the one for you. That's the podcast website for myself. If you want to go there, and we'll jump into our guests soon. But as we do, in true Christmas special episode sites, I've got yes, this is how we're gonna do this from moving forward now. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, what's
I hope you
going
guys can hear the
on?
music. Let me just reduce the volume over here.
Glad to be here.
Welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for coming in. And I've got one more panel coming in, one more guest of mine coming in. But I just wanted to give the audience a good heads up. Chris Crokin from Hacker Valley Studio, and we'll get into all about you as we get into it. But let me just welcome the second guest,
Let's do
who I think we should. I'm just waiting for my song to come up. And it's like. Oh,
there it is. There it is.
I'm waiting for the beat. I love the song, by the way. I love both the songs. I just realized this was my first attempt at having an intro song because I saw like, why not do this as like a conference where you're gonna go and you see all these other people kind of go and go on the stage with some music in the background. I'm like, this is so cool. I'm just gonna do this for all my guests moving forward. Hey, morning, Vineet. Thanks for coming in, man. So we've got guests coming in as well. But before we start, and I know all three of us know each other, but some of the guests may not. So I'm gonna start in my tripod. Chris, can you tell us a bit about yourself? How'd you got into cybersecurity as well, and a bit about your podcast as well?
Yeah, for sure. Chris Cochran. I'm co-host of the Hacker Valley Studio podcast. In our podcast, we really focus on the human condition to inspire peak performance in cybersecurity. But I got in via the Marine Corps. I was in the Marine Corps for 5 years. I was at the National Security Agency. I was at Cyber Command for a little bit as a consultant. Had my own company for a while. Did the roundabout consulting practices. I was at Mandiant. I was at Booz Allen Hamilton. I was at Netflix for a little bit. And then ultimately now I'm at a company called Marqeta. It's a fintech company, and I'm the director of security engineering. But my true passion is this podcast thing. And I can't wait to have this discussion and get to talk and chop it up with you guys.
Awesome. I'm sorry going to chopping it up as well. James, over to you, man. So who's James? How'd you get into cybersecurity?
How'd I get into cyber? So like Chris, I was in the military, did Intel in my time in the military, came out of the military, worked for a telecom company for about 4 years before I decided that corporate America wasn't for me, moved across the world, started two companies, sold them, came back, and both of my companies were in fintech and cyber, essentially in fraud analytics and so forth, and ended up starting a podcast 2 years ago called Cyber Hub Podcast and CISO Talk now that I also have. That's our kind of flagship podcast, and Goodbye Privacy. And man, yeah, like Chris, I stay busy, and podcasting is the thing I love to do. It is the true passion of creating and being able to guide people through the path of life and watch people grow and watch your listeners who, start with you as basic, red teamers and all of a sudden become CTI guys because they get inspired when you have someone like Chris on your show. And then you bring on a CISO like Kurt John over at Siemens, who was a red teamer 10 years ago. Today, he's a CISO at Siemens. And being able to share those stories that inspire people is what life's all about.
That's awesome. And I definitely echo the feeling of podcasting that both of you have. It's one of those things where a lot of people may look at it and go, that looks like a lot of work. And don't get me wrong, it is a lot of work. Like, I'm sure all people are like, oh, damn, it is a lot of work. But I'm also curious to know, I guess, was podcasting always on your mind, or what at what point was it like, oh, you know what, podcasting it's going to be? I'm going to switch over back to Chris for this question first. Why podcasting?
Yeah, so I've dabbled in a few different mediums. When I was before the Marine Corps, I was a dancer, and I used to put out dance videos all the time. And this is even before like YouTube. I have some things on you. There you go, some tutting.
Hang on, I gotta find your YouTube stuff now. Hang on.
Actually, there was just some. I was just on Smashing Security for their live stream, and they made me dance. So
so we're definitely gonna get that video.
Yeah. But yeah, so and I've dabbled in a few different mediums. I even had a stint where I was trying to be like this motivational fitness guy on Instagram. I had like a camera crew follow me around for this like fitness journey, and nothing ever like clicked. Like it just didn't click. But when I found the medium of podcasting with my good friend Ron Eddings, I would say that it was a slow burn at first. It wasn't just like an aha moment, but once that momentum started, and I just couldn't stop. Like I would say there hasn't been a day that's gone by over the last almost 2 years where I haven't thought about podcasting. I haven't thought about getting better at asking questions. You know, I brought in a coach to help me with my speech. I just constantly am iterating over and over and over again just to see what works and what doesn't. And I'm obsessed, man. I have a quick story that I like to tell. I was a wrestler when I was in high school, and I was okay this year. And my coach was a tyrant, and he would just make us like do this ridiculous. It was borderline like abusive because he would just make us do this stuff over and over again. And there was this hill in the back of our school. It was probably like 40 or 50 feet up. And he would just make us like go up and down, up and down. And, you know, in those dreams where you're trying to run fast, but you can't, you feel like you're running in like slow motion. I felt that. Like I was trying to run faster, and I just couldn't. But there was this guy who was our star wrestler named Aloysius. And it seemed like he was running faster with every single sprint up that hill. And I remember my coach screaming, spitting, coming out of his mouth. He's like, Aloysius is a man possessed. He's a man possessed. He was just incredible. And that stuck with me in my mind. And when I think about this podcast stuff, people ask, like, is it a lot of work? You're daggone right. It's a lot of work. But every single day, I'm like working on that craft. I'm constantly iterating over and over and over again. So I'm a man possessed when it comes to this podcast stuff.
So wait, were you like Gary Vee? For people who know Gary Vee, where so when you mentioned the whole, you had a person walking around with a video camera. Do you find that was that like the whole Gary Vee style? Like every day is a vlog?
No, not every day. We would do like video once a week of me working out, and it was also like a dancing component to it. So that I would show a little dancing every once in a while.
Ooh, I just imagine you dancing and it's like do like a bicep curl at the one.
That is exactly it. I'll send you an Instagram vid of it. But
yeah, definitely.
Because I've always felt like I had, you know, knowledge that I wanted to share with folks. I felt like I could help folks in some way, and I was just kind of tweaking tune and try to find out what that was. And when this podcast thing started rolling, you know, I really found something that I felt like was impactful for people, the people that we bring on, the people that listen to our show. So since then, I feel like this is the medium for me.
That's awesome, man. And James, what motivated you, and why podcasting?
So to me, it was a little different. I was a young CISO after I sold my companies, and I decided that I wanted to really focus in on cyber. I bought a bunch of mentors, and as an entrepreneur, right? And Chris knows this, and you do as well, Ashish. Like, we want to listen to people who know more than us, right? Like, so we're constantly learning. It's reading books, it's listening to books, it's listening to podcasts, interviews, right? Like, some people listen to music 10 hours a day. Other people listen to music for 30 minutes to get going. And then the other 9.5 hours, they're getting better. They're just overwhelming themselves with knowledge. And I was like that. I was hungry to learn. And 2.5 years ago, I think our industry in cyber had a little bit less of pure cyber content and podcasting. A lot of it was very vendor driven. So it was, we're going to do a podcast. We're going to interview with one of the greats in our industry, right? Whether it be, some of the guys that have been doing this for 8-9 years. And they interview there and they're talking, they predominantly always spoke about a problem that they were trying to sell something to solve. And while there's some great content with that, the stories of the people was really what I wanted to listen to, right? The basics of doing it. A lot of times I remember watching TV shows or anything like that, and they'd always show you the person getting to success. But the best movies, the best TV shows are the ones that show you the path. Rocky is Rocky, not because of the fight. It's because of the path he took to be able to fight, right? If I told you who he fought in Rocky 1, 2, 3, and 4, you'd be remiss to name all 4 unless you're a diehard Rocky fan. But but you'd be able to tell me he was punching tires, he was training in the hills and the elements, running, jogging. And those are the stories I wanted to hear from cyber professionals, and I couldn't find them. And one of my mentors here said, James, start a podcast. So that's what I did. I Googled how to start a podcast. And I was like, okay. And I just started reaching out to people and bringing them on the show. And like Chris, I think when you first start, you can't listen to yourself, right? Like it's so weird to listen to yourself.
Yeah.
I think it took me like 3.5 months to just be able to go through an entire podcast episode where I'd be able to listen to myself without just going like, what were you thinking? That's so stupid. Right. And like I'd look at Micah at the time, who was my editor, and I'd be like, Micah, why didn't you edit this stuff out? He goes, no, James, this stuff is good. I was like, no, Micah, it's stupid. And we'd sit there and have an arguing session over editing, right? But I think that's the journey of a podcast, is you've got to be able to be critical of yourself, right? You've got to be able to be want to get better. I think what Chris said really inspired me in that, you're always trying to get better at podcasting every single day. I do a daily podcast every morning, and every day, there are some days where you're trying to find something that would resonate, right? We don't always get the last 10 days in cyber, right? The last 10 days in cyber have been great from a perspective of conversation and people wanting to listen.
Right.
But not great in terms of what's happening, but great in terms of we've been able to take the conversation 5 steps forward. And it's a shame that something like this has to happen to get the conversation where it needs to go, but that's been the case. And you're trying to find the things that would help people get better at their job, or help people do what they do better. And there's an aspect to that I think as security people, right? You don't get into security to be complacent. If you want complacency, I'd suggest a cashier at Costco, a janitor somewhere. I'm not saying those aren't bad. Those are bad jobs, but I'm just saying those are jobs where you can be complacent, meaning you go and you do the same thing for 8 hours. In cybersecurity, you have no room for complacency. You have to live, breathe, speak, sleep, eat cyber. And if you don't do that, you're going to be looking at the wall wondering where everything went.
That's such an interesting point as well, because I'm sure from threat intelligence perspective as well, there is this notion that, all it takes is just one person to get through, right? From a blue team perspective, it can be like, oh, I'm protecting all these SQL injection, cross-site scripting, blah, blah, blah. You throw all of them, but all it takes is just one successful attack, and next thing you know, you're I don't want to ditch any names out there, but that's what it takes to just get to a headline. But that's pretty awesome, man. I'm so James, by the way, I'm glad that someone suggested podcasting, and I love your I think I mentioned this off camera as well, but I'll just say this on camera. I love your short content. I think you definitely mastered that game to the point that, which reminded me of learning from mistakes. This was supposed to be virtual coffee with Ashish, so cheers, guys.
Dude, cheers.
It took me a while. I should have started with this, but cheers.
Espressos are only cold for 10 minutes. I'm about to down a cold espresso.
Oh, sorry about that, man. Sorry. Wait, so you're having an espresso. What are you having, Chris?
The Macallan 18. It's the holiday. I'm on vacation, so I'm indulging just a tad.
Nice.
So I just suggested to Chris, and I'm a hold to his I'm a hold him to the fire, that every Friday we jump on a 10-minute live, and because I'm a Macallan guy, And for those who don't believe me, go to look at my LinkedIn story. I literally just posted my Friday McAllen.
Oh, wow. Hey, let's
So-
get sponsored by McAllen. Let's make it happen.
I've been trying to get an
that would be awesome.
I've been trying to get an espresso to sponsor my show for 2 years, man. I've emailed them segments. I've had CISOs drinking espressos. I've had people's heartbeats on mic going. Boo, 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 boo. They're not used to the caffeine injection.
It's gonna happen. Let's make it happen.
We definitely need to put one of those petitions together. Hey, McAllen, I might have to try McAllen because I don't know why I haven't tried this. So is this like a Scotch or a whiskey?
Scotch. Mm-hmm.
Scotch.
Oh, an 18-year-old Scotch is what you're having
18.
right now.
My favorite is 21. 25 is okay. I like 21 a lot, but I'd say the 18 is probably my daily drink if I have one.
All right. So sounds like I need to do in-person McAllen with both of you then. So
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
I would be so keen for it because I don't know why I haven't tried. I've tried a going into a very different conversation. I just keep going into alcohol.
Alcohol has a lot to do with podcasting.
No, we're not supposed to get into that right now. This is like much later. Let's warm it up. Let's warm it up for people. I've got an idea, and I've got a cybersecurity podcasting that I want to start. And choosing a niche is a lot of people talk about. Like, I think you guys have your own niche. Say, James, you have your daily podcast. Chris, you have I guess you're not just focusing on cybersecurity, you're doing leadership as well.
Yep.
So for people who may be looking for inspiration to what's their niche, or maybe even making that diet one step even further, where is there a need for a niche, or can you just be like a generic cybersecurity podcast? From the experience you've had so far, what are you guys thinking from that perspective? Do you have to have a niche? Because I feel like a lot of us start from a very technical perspective. I know everything because I've done threat intelligence, I've done application security, I've dabbed also into static code analysis. So it's and to James's point earlier, it's like so much in here that you kind of are always breathing, eating, sleeping, McAllen every day with cybersecurity. So, what is it important to have a niche, Chris?
It's absolutely important to have a niche. And I would say that if you have something to say, sure, if you want to start general and you want to start tweaking and tuning and see what resonates with folks, sure. But I would say if you're going to jump into podcasting, look for the thing that only you can tell. Like maybe make the alignment that only you could make. Like, so for us, like Ron and I are really, really obsessed with, productivity, personal growth and development. Like it's just getting better every day. So how do you marry that up with cybersecurity? Because we have folks on our podcast that have nothing to do with cybersecurity. We have master storytellers. We have chess grandmasters. We have folks that are in fitness. We have women that are authors that write books about self-care for women. Like we have all these different types of characters on our podcast, but what we do is we try to find that alignment for the cybersecurity practitioner. And so we really focus on it from the standpoint of, we think that cybersecurity practitioners are mental athletes with no off season. Like we're playing chess, like with chess grandmasters every single day, 5 days a week for 365 days a year. So what is the information that those folks are going to need to be their best on a given day? And so that's our niche, right? And so if you can find something that it might be a nexus, it might be a small subset of threat intelligence, threat hunting, chaos engineering, but find that thing that speaks to you that you can talk about for many, many times, because you don't want to get into pod fade around like episode 6 or 7, something you could talk forever, subjects that get you amped up and jazzed up. And then just keep going and have a plan for what that niche is going to do. And it might change over time. Like our niche has changed a bit over time, but just start doing something. And then it might take a minute to find your niche, or you might get it right away. It just really depends. But I would say if you're going to start though, start doing it. We didn't read books. We didn't go to classes when we first started. We did now. Like I've taken half a dozen podcast classes at this point, read a half a dozen books. But when I started, we just started doing it, and we found our niche along the way. So I don't think you have to have it up front, but I think it does help you if you do have that focus in the beginning.
Wait, what's pod fade? You touched on this, and I'm like, what is pod fade?
So pod fade is what happens when folks get to about episode 6 or 7, and then they realize how much work it is for such a little return in the beginning. Because if you're doing podcasting to get likes and claps and people saying, oh my gosh, that's changed my life, it's not going to come in the beginning. It's not going to come at all. So my ulterior motive, I would also say that folks need to have an ulterior motive for doing their podcast. My ulterior motive was I legitimately love having conversations with folks from all around the world that are great in whatever it is that they're great at. Just having those conversations. And just luckily we had enough creativity to be able to like direct it towards cybersecurity. So it doesn't matter if there were still like 3 people like listening to my show. Maybe after 2 years, that might be a little much, but I just loved having these conversations and sharing it. And if one person found value in it, all the better. But like just doing it and having that grit and that grind and understanding that 6 or 7 episodes in, you still might not have an audience, but just keep going and don't give up. And that's probably one of the best things that I could say if you want to start a podcast.
Trust the process, huh?
Yeah, trust the process.
Yeah.
And James, yours is an interesting one because your podcast is a CISO chalk, and CISO, as we know, is like pretty generalized, right? It has to be by nature of it. You're gonna have to know all. I mean, I guess that's my opinion of it, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on niche for a podcast.
So I mean, I do 3 podcasts now, right?
Yeah.
So
yes,
Goodbye Privacy. So Goodbye Privacy is a privacy niche, and it's very widespread. I've had moms come up to me and talk to me about my podcast. Like I was at Whole Foods and someone recognized me from my show, and she goes, "You're the Goodbye Privacy guy." And I was like, "Yeah, I am." And she's like, "I want to talk to you about this app my kid's using." And social distancing went out the door. Luckily, we're both wearing masks. And we had a conversation that's very niche. My Cyber Hub podcast is a generalist. It's a headline podcast, right? 10 minutes a day. What I'm as a CISO, as a practitioner, the things that I'm looking at to start off my day. And then my CISO talk is purely CISO to CISO conversation, right? So I'm very, very niched. And my content is very, it took me a while to find it though. For about a year, I was all over the place. Right, I was dancing everywhere, and trying to kind of find my voice and try to find what resonated and try to find what was effective. So I had John McAfee on my podcast, right? Well, that's a great boost for the podcast. You're going to get like 150,000 downloads when you have a guy like John McAfee on your show. But how many of those do you retain? And then how do those people start to look at your other content? And then how many of them actually subscribe to your stuff? Right. So there's aspects of just really trying to be niche, but also being very oriented in terms of understanding that if you do the same thing over and over and over and over again, it's great. But like Chris does magnificently on his podcast, it's all about variation and every once in a while changing it up. So bringing in a different voice and adding a little bit more value to your audience. So as you're starting out, find your voice. Don't worry about a niche at the beginning. Just start experimenting and get feedback. Like the 10 people that listen to you at the very beginning or the 50 people that listen to you at the very beginning, make them part of your growth process. Yeah. Tie them in, get them emotionally connected to what you're trying to do.
That's awesome. And to your point, when people say find your voice, I almost feel it's one of those ones. It's hard to understand. Like, and I totally struggled with it myself. When people told me initially, "Oh, you should find your voice," I'm like, "But I know my voice. What do you mean I need to find my voice?" And I'm coming from an honest place as well. It's almost when you hear it for the first time. Unless you get into this, you don't realize the subtlety what that statement really means. Like, do you feel? Is it easy to find?
Is it easy to find your voice? I think that depends on how honest you are with yourself. Right? It requires a little bit of the ability to, when I was 275 pounds, it took me to look at myself in the mirror one day and say, "Holy smokes, you've never been this big before. You got to do something about it." Right? And that's a very tough conversation for one to have. Right? It's a very difficult conversation for one to have because what you're essentially saying is my lifestyle, I'm damaging myself by myself, through myself. And so if you have that honesty to be able to say that to yourself, then the more honest you are with yourself, the easier it'll be for you to find your voice. the more you keep telling yourself stories, and we humans, we have a tendency to, especially men. All right. Men have a tendency, like,
let's just not push all the men under the bus.
well, but men have a tendency to tell ourselves stories like, you know, you're the best, you're the greatest, you're all these different things. People want to hear from you, but you got to find your style and you've got to be able to find your voice, but you've got to be honest with yourself. If you're not very outgoing and you try to be outgoing, that's not going to work. If you're a sarcastic person, be sarcastic.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because that's you. That's what people are gonna want to hear, right? Like if you're quiet, be quiet. But if you're quiet, don't do a podcast. Like no one wants to listen to guys saying like, hi, welcome to today's show. We're gonna talk about words.
This is my radio DJ
right
voice.
Yeah, this is my radio like but I like Chris, I think, and a lot of other people. I reached out to a lot of podcasters. Like I honestly reached out to some of the biggest names in the industry and they were all very welcoming, right? Just jumping on phone calls and text messages and willing to just, tell you like what they did. I mean, people think of Joe Rogan and go, well, I want to be like Joe Rogan on episode 10. And I'm like, it took Joe Rogan 7 years to get to where he got. 7 years. 7 years. If you listen to Joe Rogan like episode 100, it is nothing like Joe Rogan episode 1200. Nothing at all.
That's a lot of time on the mic, man. That's a lot of time on the mic. He does like 3-hour episodes. So
I want to do those in cyber. I want to do these long form interviews in cyber. Like I really like if you ask me like I think cyber deserves a long form podcast because there's a discussion around cyber when you sit with really smart people that goes beyond technology, that goes beyond people and goes into the process. And the process of cyber is so complex and intertwined. And one of the common things that we constantly hear in cyber is Chris worked for Netflix, right? And that's completely different than working for Marketo. That's a fintech company, right? Because I know fintech, right? So fintech, it's a lot of compliance, it's a lot of regulation, it's a lot of auditing and regulatory, and somehow those always will fall under cyber in one way or another. Now that's a process and that's complex, but that's also part of cyber. Right. And there's an aspect to that of just being able to draw the line between Netflix and Marketo. And I'm sorry for using you as an example, Chris, or between Amazon and UPS. Right. Yep. There's that process between the two that needs to be brought together and spoken. Like I've been trying to find the niche for the long form Joe Rogan style 2-hour cybersecurity podcast, because I feel like those conversations that's where you're gonna get a lot of the hidden gems that you need in order to develop as a cybersecurity professionals, in order to build a better cybersecurity program, in order to improve, and also in order to start finding the real significant voices of what people do in cyber.
That's interesting because I always thought a lot of people have a short span, like a short focus attention kind of span. But then I started watching Joe Rogan and I'm like, this guy can do 3-hour videos with like Elon Musk. And do you reckon there's a space for that? And I do understand that every industry has its own niche, but do you feel there's like a space for like because I'm just thinking of people who may be listening to this and think, oh, I can go for 3 hours for something. But would you want to start with that though? Like, or kind of like yourself, have a base first so you have some audience, then go into like a Joe Rogan style 3-hour, 4-hour long videos or episodes.
So I'll say this. I've been toying with the idea. I did a show last December that was on quantum computing with the chief innovation officer of the CDC. This was pre-COVID. Okay.
Right.
So if you listen to that show though, right, that show has had more downloads in the last month than ever before. It was a 3-hour and 40-minute conversation. We took it down to 1 hour and 50 minutes. And it's simply because quantum is now in the news. But we were talking about quantum in the aspects of post-quantum cryptography, and post-quantum security, and the idea of what quantum would look like in a realized world in a decade.
Right.
And Chris, who I had on the show, one of the smartest people I know. This guy has been with the CDC for like 30 some odd years. He built their entire IT infrastructure before they had one. So this guy now is like looking at future technologies to be used at the CDC. And it was funny, in one of our examples, we talk about a pandemic breaking out and the idea of what quantum computing would do to us from a data perspective in order to manage a pandemic in the country.
That's crazy.
And lo and behold, 3 months later, we are in a pandemic. Now, if you only had a quantum computer to break down those numbers.
Well, you shouldn't hear about Australia because, it was at the UK. They got the numbers wrong because of a limitation in Excel sheet.
Of course.
So the number of new cases were incorrect on a particular day or two because they were using Excel sheet. And like, what people at this level are using Excel to find out the number of cases?
Ashish has never worked for the government. They're still using Windows 2000, man.
Oh, yeah. Hey, that's supposed to be a secret, James. Talking about quantum, I've got David Raviv as well, who's basically suggesting Satoshi Nakamoto. I think, if memory serves me right, that's the guy who's behind blockchain.
That was the guy behind Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The Bitcoin blockchain. So we have another one of the...
Yeah.
It'll be an interesting topic as well for long form content, I imagine.
Yeah, if you can get, I think Joe Rogan was trying to get Satoshi for like months, and
really,
yeah.
Oh, well, although, and to your point about Joe Rogan, right? I feel like he's kind of become the benchmark that now a lot of people are like, oh, you want to be like Joe Rogan, but I'm kind of feel like I love when people are successful, but I always look at that as that they're just showing, or you're just seeing the winning lottery ticket for them. That's what got them success. But that doesn't necessarily mean, to your point about James, about finding your voice, you like someone listening to this may find their success in like a short form 1 minute video content as well.
1 minute podcast every day.
That's right. And just
people fall in love with it.
Sorry?
I said people would fall in love with a 1 minute episode, or like you ever seen? I used to write them, but those 2-sentence horror stories, like people love that stuff. So I mean, what's beautiful about the audio medium is that really it's all up to your imagination. And if you're like, I just want to be like Joe Rogan, you're starting from the wrong spot. You should want to be like you. Like, what does you look like in audio? Like, what does your personality look like? What does your format look like? I mean, really, you write your own ticket. So I would say that sure, you could use people as like as aspirational, like, I want to be successful like Joe Rogan, but you don't want to go hop on the mic and immediately like just be Joe Rogan.
Yeah, you don't want to do like all day, all night, baby. Right? Like you don't want to do that, right? And I echo what Chris just said, which is you can look at other podcasters and like some things that they do, right? So you listen to Joe and you go, you know what? Joe's able to stay objective in his interviews for the most part, predominantly. The guy's very, he asks tough questions, right? So you go, okay, I'm going to take that from Joe, right? And you may be able to listen to someone else, another podcaster you like, and go, that's great. He speaks truth. And you may listen to Gary Vee and you want to drop the F-bomb every other word. And that could be okay too if your audience has the appetite for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. But trying to be something you're not, I think a lot of, and I remember thinking this when I started my show, was who are you, and trying to emulate someone you're not is the worst thing you could do for yourself. Right. It's just be who you are, find your voice. And it's okay to learn from others because we as humans evolve, right? We evolve as people. So your podcasting style is going to evolve. Right. And so it's okay to evolve. It's not okay to stay complacent.
I agree. And I was going to add this. I feel audio is becoming so important to the point that it's not just about a 1 minute content, but in Twitter is supporting voice usage. Like you don't have to write anything. and you could just have inspiration having a glass of Mackel. I'm gonna keep using the Mackel example, and suddenly like I'm gonna do a LinkedIn story as you did early today, James, or come up with another daily bite. Today I feel like talking about cybersecurity awareness or something related, because I'm sure everyone is a bit creative, and everyone gets moments of inspiration where they're just sitting and just having a moment like, oh, wonder how that would work with cybersecurity. And that could be your first episode, right? It doesn't take a lot of effort. You just record on your phone. Don't think about and one thing that I didn't want to do in this podcast was talk about the mic, the headphones, like all that is not important really.
Just Google it.
Yeah. That's right. There's so many videos out there about this. And to your point about finding your niche and the medium, like I think James, you do yours live stream as well. It's kind of like myself, and Chris, yours is like audio version. You have a YouTube channel as well. Did you guys have like a thought on, because there's a whole video podcast space, and then there is like the audio and video podcast space, and just the audio. Like, what are your thoughts on those spaces? I'll go with Chris first.
Yeah, so we played with video in the very beginning, and we were terrible at it. And our audio far exceeded our video. And so I was like, hey, let's just drop video for now. And now we do live streams on LinkedIn, but still, because the audio doesn't match the video in those live streams, because I use this mic for live streams. But then I hop in my ISOVox with my my Shure, and that's when the audio is like perfect, right? So we're still finding that balance of doing video and making sure that the audio is just right. I'd love to be like in a studio where everything we put out is like podcast quality, but not quite there yet. But I do feel like people love to see people, right? They love to see your face. I mean, it just adds an additional dynamic. But there's also something that's very intimate about audio, about podcasting, and like having that conversation and being in someone's ear while they're like doing other things, like maybe they're doing chores around the house, maybe they're driving, but just having the audio is like a completely different scenario. And one thing that we actually just had a guy that's a master storyteller on the podcast. So this episode isn't out yet. It'll be out in January, but what he says is like, people want to see that mental movie. Like storytellers, like you have to be able to give people that mental picture of what they're talking about. And I feel like if you do podcasting well, you'll give people that mental picture. Like they'll be able to see people either like sitting around a table, or, you know, after this COVID mess is over with, or they'll see the story that the person that's on the podcast is telling. And sometimes your imagination is just better than reality. So I would say there's definitely space for both. But if you're going to do both, take both seriously, take your audio seriously, and take, putting out videos seriously as well. Because I mean, some people, they'll base it just mainly off of the quality of your audio. Like if you're going to do it, like try to do it to your best of your ability. Even if you have to just use the Apple Pods or whatever, and go, but don't go in your bathroom and try to record a podcast. If you're going to use your Apple Pods, at least go into a closet and try to record.
But in the bathroom, you can multitask, Chris.
No, don't do it. If you send me audio and it's in a bathroom with AirPods, I'm not listening.
And the flash goes off.
And the flash. That could be a niche though, and that's all I have to say about that.
Totally.
That would be a great political commentary podcast, right? What did he say? Flush.
Yeah. Actually, that could be one. And to your point about the audio thing as well, Chris, the whole ASMR space is just that as well, right? It's just about audio. Massive audience there. Yes. The first time I heard it, I was like, I'm glad I didn't listen to an audio which connected with me. I just listened to this person doing this weird thing with the mic, and I'm like, oh my god! If this was something that I felt, I guess if it worked for me, I would be listening to that lady for like 24/7, right? So totally, audio is it's like one of those. I think the radio DJ voice that James said earlier. It's just one of those ones. You're talking to a date or you're on a date. It could be cybersecurity date. And I love that thing about audio. Yes. James, what are your thoughts on the whole audio and video podcast?
So I do both on all my podcasts. I do audio and video, and I'm proud to say that my YouTube channel just last week became monetized. So
Congrats.
I am ecstatic about that. That was a long battle. I was supposed to be monetized in April, and they censored my Goodbye Privacy season, my second season, because it was on elections. And apparently in April, my entire second season got taken down by YouTube. And we're not going to get into that. That is part of the challenge of being a podcaster, is if you want to speak truth to glory, if you want to be able to, I shouldn't say speak truth, if you want to be able to raise controversial topics like cyber election security and do research and so forth, don't expect everyone to see things the way you do, period. And unfortunately, I encountered that, and I was able to beat it, and finally, I'll be launching the second season again on January 1st. So I'm really excited about that. But I do both. Everything I do, my entire setup is built for audio video. My audio and video quality are pretty decent at this point. I obviously invested in state of the art equipment, and I also understood the need for it to be video. I agree with Chris that audio is very intimate, and in a world pre-COVID, audio dominated video simply because people commuted, people were in their cars, right? So no one puts up a YouTube video and listens to you. What was very interesting for me and was I started to see a switch to video, and then a switch to our website. And I started seeing the numbers didn't go down into audio, but we started to see an increase of people watching. And that kind of increased with time, right? So there's an aspect to people wanting to watch you, especially now. A lot of people are at home. Everyone's at home, not a lot of people. Everyone's at home. People are working, and they'll put something on the TV, and it's not going to be cable TV. It's going to be YouTube, or it's going to be Rumble, or it's going to be any other platform that they watch videos on, and they're going to look you up and they're going to watch you. And that's how they're going to connect with you. Audio is going to come back. And I think the one thing that I've heard from a lot of people is, even if you look at some of the big podcasters, and there's a bunch of places out there, by the way, I don't know if you guys know it or not, where you can see like podcasting statistics and see like some of the biggest rankings and whatnot. But you can also, if you go to YouTube and you start to look at, for example, the top podcast on audio, and then look at it in video and go back, you're starting to see more people go to video. But I think that's a temporary trend. I think it's a temporary trend because people can't travel. I think the moment people start traveling and commuting again, audio is going to be king. So don't compromise audio for video, but at the same time, I was able to find the right setup to do both. And that's something that I strongly believe in, because like my 10-minute podcast, I'm turning it into a lot more visual. So I'm actually going to make it worth it for more people to go watch it, because it's going to have a lot more visual graphics rather than, these are all my scripts, right? The backside of my scripts becomes my notes. That's how I save paper, right? I don't buy notebooks. I just print my script,
great.
right? And then I use the back of it for my notes. And then when I'm done with my notes, I shred them.
I got this cool little Remarkable too. I love this thing.
Oh, you got Remarkable. All right. I'm just gonna go to Mac here just for no notes. There you go. So another tip for everyone: just have a side thing so you can take notes while you're while you're recording this.
But I do manual notes, right? But I mean, I'm going more visual, right? Because I see that there's a value in people watching you for 10 minutes. It's also a good mental break for people.
And I think to your point, you can have that experience in both audio and video as well. And I'm sure, and to your point, for people who may be listening to this and thinking I'm going to start a podcast, they don't have to go down the path of doing both audio and video, because not everyone's comfortable with video as well. Like to your point about listening to yourself, watching yourself is probably another one. It's like, oh, I'm scratching my head there, and like, oh, I put my finger in my nose or whatever. And you're like, you don't want to be like, you get super conscious. Like some people may have it really natural. They're like, oh, I don't really care. I'm just gonna put on a camera and just start talking into the camera. Like I think, and I feel it's okay for people to understand that it's a journey. Day one, you could just be doing like a 10-second video on how you got inspired by something for cybersecurity. So for me as well, I definitely went down the path of audio and video, and I definitely found I've got a different set of audience on audio and a different set of audience on video, which is really interesting because I hear people talk about, and like, okay, but they don't know each other. And I don't know how it's possible, but a lot of them don't know each other. So I kind of have to like almost have these different kinds of conversation with them. But that made me also think of the fact that we've kind of come into a space where audio and video are going to go through another transition once we kind of come out of COVID, to exactly, James, your point. Is there I guess from a perspective of reaching out to guests, do you think that would change? Because now people are no longer, or I guess once the whole beyond COVID, people are not stuck at home. They can go out, and interviews are going to be harder, or at least that's what I feel. It'll be really interesting if people go back traveling and we come back to a normal, by whatever the new normal is, and suddenly you stop getting guests. There could be that challenge as well. And what are your theories on just guests in general? In I guess approaching guests. I've got a question here from Vinny's on the same topic as well. How do you approach guests, especially as a beginner when you don't have any following?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
I mean, first you start with the people that are closest to you. You don't reach out to the best-selling authors like off the bat. You don't reach out to the movie stars, the athletes off the bat. You just reach out to your network. And then what's really interesting is that as you bring people on from different networks and then they start to share it, then all of a sudden that network becomes by proxy your network. And so you have these like spiders that are crawling out and expanding your own personal reach. And so then you start bringing on those folks. But I would say if you're going to reach out to somebody, and like, let's say this is somebody that's pretty notable in cybersecurity, maybe they're notable in podcasting, I would reach out to them and have a plan. Like understand the stuff that they put out. Did they put out a book? Read the book, understand the book, have questions about the book. Do they do a podcast? Listen to the podcast. Because you want to show that you're genuinely interested in the work that they do and not just trying to do like a grab for likes or listens because you have a big name on your podcast. So, and then to your point about not being able to get folks once this like COVID stuff is over, I don't think that's going to be an issue. Like whoever is, I mean, I don't know if you believe in serendipity or fate or what have you, but if someone is too busy to be on your podcast, maybe you didn't want them to be on your podcast anyways. There's a lot of folks that you might want on your podcast that have a huge following, but they might be terrible guests, and they might say the exact same thing they said on someone else's podcast. So you really want to look at some of our best episodes were from people that had no following whatsoever, because they allowed us to take that conversation to the depths of the human condition. So I wouldn't be too wrapped up about whether you can get guests or not. Just stay diligent, and people are going to be willing to take that platform and use that to express their voice.
Sweet. What are your thoughts on this, James?
So I agree with everything Chris just said, and I know that doesn't make for an interesting show, but
it doesn't.
I agree with everything he said. The only thing I would add to that is, and I think I would even enhance it even more, is when you're getting started, I interviewed like random people for my first 6 episodes. My 4th episode, I interviewed my wife.
Yeah.
Really?
That's serious, because my wife was my business partner. She was my boss. Before she was my wife, before she was my girlfriend, she was my boss, and she fired me. And then we started a company together, right? So we had a really fun story, and it was a really fun show to do, right?
You fired me. We should date. Like, is that how?
Yeah, like it wasn't even like that. She fired me, and then she was like, "I'm starting a company. You want to come work at my company?" And I was all like, "Yeah, why not?" And
that was the beginning of the relationship. That's pretty good.
Well, I knew right then and there that I wanted to. No matter what, things don't always work out in business. I think we can all agree, right?
Yeah.
Not every role you take, you're the perfect fit for. Again, being honest with yourself, very important as a podcaster, right? Knowing that when bad things happen, they might be good things that seem bad right then and there, but they're really good. So just get people on your show and find your voice with the people who you know, right? Because those people are also going to be a little bit more honest with you. Like my wife, when we finished the podcast, she goes, "You're really loud and high energy. You got to calm down." She goes, "You're bouncing all over the place." Like I didn't want to talk to her for the rest of the night, right? but then after a little bit, you sit down and you go, maybe she's right. Maybe I am too loud. Maybe I should, kind of concentrate my energy on different aspects of the show, and you grow from there. So I think initially, don't go for the big names, and when you go for the big names, a lot of times I've found that they don't much care for following. It's all about what can you help me with, right? So what's your value add to your guest beyond them coming and speaking on your show? What do they get to be a part of?
Yep.
Right. And have a structure for your show. I think guests also like to have structure. I send every guest that comes on the show a PDF. It's got a layout of the interview. It's got a sample of some questions I may ask. It kind of gives them an idea of what to come prepared for. And I also tell them the stuff I won't ask them. Like when I do CISO talk, the first line on there is, I will never ask you about your cybersecurity program. I'm not going to ask you about what vendors you use, and I don't care what technology you're doing. This is not an intel. I'm not going to make your life hard by putting out stuff out there that doesn't need to be out there. Right.
Yep.
We're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about cyber in general, but really I want to talk about you. I want to talk about your career path. I want others. I think there's when you're in sports, right? We all want to play for Phil Jackson, right? Yeah. Like if you're a basketball fan and someone would be like, "Hey, if you could be a pro basketball player, what coach would you want to play for?" And most people would say Phil Jackson, right? They'd be like, "I want to play for Phil. Phil's got like more rings than anyone else. He's coached the best players on the planet, right? Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal. I mean, he's the guy." So why do we not have the same in cyber? Why do we not have Phil Jacksons in cyber? My CISO talk show is designed to really highlight the coaches of cyber, the people who lead programs.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And sorry, no, go on.
So when you want to look for a job and you go, I want to go work for whatever big name company, right? Well, the first question you're going to ask yourself is, well, who's leading that organization? Like, am I going to be set up for success? Who is that person?
Yeah, and to your point about the guests as well, because then when you do approach them, you're able to give value because you've already done some background research on them to go, okay, this is how I can add value to them. It's very interesting. And I did want to call out on the guest part because I don't know if you see this, James, but because I do live stream as well, a lot of people say no for that. So a lot of people are okay to have an audio only, but they just do not find themselves comfortable to be live streamed. So if someone who's listening to this and think that I should do live stream audio and video, just saying that you have a very small set of people who you would be talking to.
Well,
I would not have a large set.
I don't do CISO Talk as a live stream.
Actually, okay, right.
It's pre-recorded and I post it every Thursday. And the reason I do that is because one hidden thing, if as you grow your podcast, if you go and you get a big CISO for a big organization, their PR is going to want to listen to the thing before you host it. And I got to tell you, I've had a few CISOs on where we get into a conversation, we start talking, and then PR will be like, cut the best part of the interview. Because it was the most honest part of the interview, but they don't want it to be but in their opinion, they don't want their executives, for example, sharing an opinion on an adversary or another country or something like that. So, I've also had to bring in my style from that aspect because I didn't want to spend hours editing a 2-minute and segmenting it because you're taking out maybe 2 minutes of gold, which was, in your opinion, a really authentic part of the show. So the higher people you go for, the bigger names you go for, the more challenging it is, one, to get them on the show, and number two, to get the show out the way you want it to. There's going to be some compromising that you're going to have to do there.
Yep, I had to go through that thing. So I had to edit my. Yeah, I totally feel your pain, man. Like, that's why I kind of said, you know what, it's easier. And I think, to be honest, kind of like exactly what you said. The reason I went live stream was just to reduce my editing window. I just could not be bothered spending my entire Sunday editing content on audio and video and then uploading both of them. I'm like, I'm just gonna live stream, streamline it. It's already there, the video. I'm just gonna edit the audio and just make sure that at least the audio is as crisp as possible for people. That's kind of how I landed on that. Uh, I'm kind of conscious of everyone's time as well. I'm kind of going towards the tail end. I wish I could make this a 2-hour show because I can talk to you boys
Hey, long
forever.
form, baby, long form. You can't get enough in an hour.
I know. Like I've still got so many questions to ask you, and but I'm gonna try and have some. I was thinking maybe I should have like a couple of questions to finish with, which I think would be valuable and people should go away with. So, what's a big no for you when you're listening to a cybersecurity podcast? And I'm considering you guys run like James, you're on 3, Chris, you're running one as well. So, from your perspective, what's a big no for you guys in the podcasting space? I think I feel I know the answer, but I do want to hear from you, James, first. You're already smiling.
So what's a big no for me? So I got to tell you something. I thought I had a lot of no's, and then this week I had a CISO talk, and the CISO who I interviewed, Jason Loomis from MindBody, he called me Howard Stern, and I was all like, "Huh?" I was like, "Howard Stern," and he goes, "Not in the shock jock type," and I was like, "Okay." Whew. I saw the post. I saw the beginning of his post, and I was like, "Oh God." So what's a big no for me in podcasting? I think in cyber, and I'll really kind of nail down the question if you don't mind. I don't ask questions that would give our adversary any sort of information that would give them a leg up. I'd want to make their life harder and not easier. So I don't ask the kind of questions I get a lot of times where fans will be like, "Well, why didn't you ask him about how he built a cyber program?" And I was like, "Yeah." Don't make someone else's life really easy to find methods and ways to weaponize their attack on the target. And so I don't ask those kinds of questions. That's kind of that's my no. And then another big no for me is consistency. You got to be consistent. And if you're going to start a podcast, he talked about the pod fade. People go 6-7 podcasts in. If you go through the podcast kind of like library on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to your podcast, I'd say 90% of those podcasts haven't had a new episode in over a year.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. That is so true. Because I think I always find that you look at a podcast and you see the last episode was 2018, 2019, and you're like, wow, these folks haven't been producing much. Chris, what are your thoughts on this?
I would say my main no, and this might be a bit of a controversial one, is when you have a show, don't make it about you. And that even if you're on your own, like even if you're doing like a one-person show, one-woman show, one-man show, don't make it about you. And especially if you're doing an interview show. If you're doing an interview show, you better not make it about you. Like I've seen podcasters that come on and they bring a guest on, and the guest might as well not even be there because the podcaster just wanted to hear themselves talk. So if you have an interview podcast, make it about them. It's a platform for them. There are some episodes where Ron and I will ask like 4 questions total, and so we speak for maybe like a 45 seconds altogether. And so we really want to highlight the best version of our guests. But even if you're doing it on your own, you shouldn't be doing it for you. You should be doing it for the listener. Like, what does the listener need to get out of this? Like, what are you trying to convey to the listener? And what are you trying to make them laugh? Because if you're trying to make them laugh, you might be telling jokes that you might not find necessarily funny, but they might enjoy. Are you trying to teach them something? Because I mean, you're not going to just pontificate on your own. Think about what they need to learn. What can they use in their daily life, in their career, in their family life, whatever it is. So don't try not to make it about yourself. Try to make it about other people, and I think you'll be on the right side of good.
Yeah, make it about your listeners. If you focus on you, that's why, like, if you focus just on yourself, man, you're in the wrong business. I would suggest you do a Facebook Live every day and just talk about yourself.
Actually, that's a good one. Yeah, I feel like that's definitely something that you can do if you're thinking about, this is my thought, I'm trying to be that person who's just me giving my thoughts. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Facebook Live needs to be much more approachable or better for that medium.
Yeah, I think one thing I would say also as a no, Chris, if you don't mind me kind of adding to what you just said, which I think is really important, is use a LinkedIn. If you're going to use LinkedIn for your podcast, make sure you're really professional with the stuff you put out there, right? I think there's an aspect of LinkedIn where I got to say LinkedIn has been my safe space for the last year. With all the election stuff and everything going, if there's been one network where I can go and I don't have to deal with any politics around, it's been LinkedIn, and I'm grateful for it. I got to tell you, I've been writing them every month. I'm like, thank you. Thank you for making this a safe space. The one safe space where I can keep my sanity and I can focus on living my life and bettering myself professionally and as a human being, right? Because you don't get that anywhere else. So be mindful of what you're putting out there. And it's okay to be you, and it's okay to not think what everyone else thinks, but also be professional about it. I saw several stuff that's been posted where you're really kind of isolating maybe a large swath of people by saying a statement or putting out a video with, you're trying to capture attention and get audience. So you put something out and you go, this is it. And you're like, you're isolating people from maybe engaging with your very valid content.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it kind of goes back to what you said, being honest with yourself. Because if you're putting it on the internet, it's there for a long time, for pretty much forever, I guess. So you probably want to have an understanding of, honestly, would you be okay with that short 15 minutes of fame and just getting that massive pile of attention? Or would you better be just going, okay, this is what I truly believe would give value to my audience, and I'm going to put it out there. I just wanted to give a shout out to Asif as well, who's a fellow podcaster from, I think his podcast is called Podcast Security in Color. I think that's what it's called.
Security in Color. Yeah, Asif.
Yes, I believe that's what his podcast is. But I just want to give a shout out as well. He was
Rio.
Yeah. And I wanted to kind of just move to the last question of this, so that I don't take too much of your time and make this really long form. What has been the biggest challenge for you in your podcast? Like, we've been talking about all the good. I've kind of been boiling up to this point. What has been the biggest challenge in this long journey that you've had with your podcast for over a year now? I think over 2 years, I believe, for both of you.
Yeah, almost 2 years for me.
Oh, well, sweet. So, James, what's been the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge, I think, is mentally. I think the biggest challenge in podcasting is psychological. It's mental. And for me, that's been the case. Am I good enough? Is my content good enough? Does my message resonate? Am I communicating what I want to communicate, or am I getting lost in the weeds? And I think that's a really big, I think that's a very significant challenge. And I think the disappointments along the way. I can't tell you how many times you're probably going to want to have a guest on who says no, or you get a guest on and then they end up canceling because of a multitude of reasons that have nothing to do with you. And you in your mind, if you're a critical person and you want to be better, you start thinking it's you. So you start to look at all the things you've done to get this guest on your show and why it didn't work out. And like I say, the toughest part of podcasting for me is the psychological, mental aspect of it, which is you've got to be consistent, you've got to find your voice, you've got to be critical of yourself, and if you're not strong enough to deal with those things, you're gonna pod fade, hashtag it along the way.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. What about you, Chris?
Patience is tough. Patience is tough in the beginning. It's tough now. All we want to do is scale and grow this business we've created. But everything takes time. Everything takes time. You're not going to get Joe Rogan's numbers overnight. I mean, and even on the more tactical level, like being patient. Sometimes I have episodes right now I want to put out so bad, but it's not time. We have a schedule. We got to stick to it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And so my momentary release is like letting my wife listen to it. I'm like, please, you got to listen to this episode. It's just so incredible. And it's never because I ask the best questions. It's because the people we bring on have such remarkable and inspiring stories. And so having patience in all that you do and having that craftswoman's mindset of like putting in the time, just like James and everyone else is saying, is like putting in that time over and over and over again, and you're going to get better. And so having that patience is going to be key.
Oh my God, so true. And I definitely find both your podcasts interesting as well from the perspective of what else could be a possibility. Like with 3 podcasts that you have, James, with sorry, it's my dog. I try and control.
It's okay, man. It's all right. This is part of COVID. I've had kids on my show. I've had dogs. I've had cats make appearances. It's the beauty.
Dogs and cats.
It's listen, man. I think this resonates with audiences, by the way. I think in a live stream, if your dog came into the shot, it makes that live stream even all the more better.
That's what wild content is, right? That's pretty much what wild content is.
Yeah.
I definitely feel the whole COVID thing has definitely made all your family members, like my to your point earlier, James, my wife's my business partner on this as well. And yeah, it's definitely interesting how this would not have happened if she was not working from home with me as well. Like, because there was that aspect of her. So I'm definitely gonna give it a shout out to her. Considering all of us mentioned our wives, I might as well mention her as well. But I did, so I get some brownie points for it. But I wanted to kind of say, this is where I would probably want to wrap it. But I loved this conversation. I thank you so much for this, and I definitely feel if we should definitely do like a 2-hour, 3-hour long form content. I feel like we could have gone for hours on this. I'm just saying, easy. I wouldn't be surprised if we had a table like Joe Rogan, just have a camera or something, and just like we can even get Ron as well, and just like all of us can just keep going. And I bet you we would easily clock the 2-3 hour mark and still have a lot to talk about.
Yep.
We would clock 3 bottles of Macallan in 3 hours.
Oh, yeah.
There would be a point where probably around hour 2.5 would be too drunk. We don't even know what we're talking about. There would come to that point.
Oh, well, as long as we don't go Elon Musk level, I guess, and not get caught by the feds of smoking weed or whatever, or depending on which state you go on.
Like, here's the thing, though. I think the when he smoked weed with Joe, it's legal in California,
right?
Yeah,
the feds can't do anything about it, right? If he smokes weed now in Austin, Texas, that's a whole other issue.
All of us need to kind of go outside the state and go to a state where all this stuff is legal, and then we have that round table and go. This is like going to be.
I recommend we go to Colorado. We get Chris Roberts in. We bring on a bunch of those guys, and we end up doing a cyber roundtable. I'm all for it, man.
Like
awesome. That is a date.
Like I'm all for it.
That is definitely a date.
I mean, you can't do a podcast. You can't do a cyber roundtable at one point or another without having Chris Roberts there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes, 100%. Especially with his. Does he still have the beard? I think he still has a long ass beard, right?
Yeah, I don't think he'll ever shave that. Yeah, I don't think there's an amount of money. I think we could do a fundraiser to get him to shave his beard. I wonder how much money would have to raise to get him to shave his beard.
Oh, that's a question for Chris. We should find that out. But I'm definitely going to look forward to that roundtable when we get past this COVID thing and people can travel finally. I definitely feel there isn't space for all of us to be hanging out with Chris and Ron. Chris Roberts and Ron from Hacker Valley Studio as well. And anyone else you guys feel, I think we could definitely have like a mini roundtable for 2-3 hours, just all of us sitting and talking about life and technology and process and cybersecurity, leadership. We could keep going, and podcasting.
Yeah. Well, there's so much people can learn from one another.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, 100%. I believe like we're all still learning, no matter how old we get or how young we are. We're always learning. Every day you find out something new. So, like I find out to remember my virtual coffee with Ashish is all about coffee as well. So, where can people find you for more information, guys? So, Chris, where can people find you? And do definitely shout out your podcast. I definitely want people to go subscribe to it, follow it, give it their love. Where can they find it?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for having us on the show. You can find podcasts at hackervalley.com. Super easy to find. And then I am definitely most active on LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out and connect with me.
Awesome. Thank you. And James, over to you.
So
Where can people
CyberHub
find your
Podcast.
podcast?
So cyberhubpodcast.com, you can see everything I do, or my YouTube channel, Cyberhub Podcast. LinkedIn is where I am the most active. So James J. Azar on LinkedIn. And the J has a very interesting story.
So they told you, man, it's like 2-3 hour show. Just like you could be like, you just drop that bomb in there right in the end. Thanks, man.
I did. But if anyone was listening, they'll probably email me and go like, what's the J for?
Oh, it's funny. Most people try and hide their middle name, and you've trying to put that.
So
go on.
it's so I'm a CISO, and I unfortunately get a ton of messages on LinkedIn every day.
Yeah.
So the way I separate automated messages from personal messages is the J. If I get a James J, I realize it's some automated syndicate, not a personal email. Because no one would ever write me an email. Like I wouldn't write Chris an email like, "Hi, Chris Cochran. How are you doing today, sir?"
Yeah, right.
I was looking at the website of Confidential.
Yeah.
By the way, I also put Confidential as my company.
Right.
That's how I filter my spam on LinkedIn.
Oh, right. That's really interesting. That's a good one. So now I know why you have confidential there.
Indeed.
Awesome. Dude, boys, this has been amazing, and I'm looking forward to a roundtable with Mikkel 20, because that's what Chris likes. But we're definitely gonna get. We might have to get a few bottles of those, though, because we'll have a lot of people on that table. So I'm sure.
McKellen's sponsor.
I know, right? Yeah, let's get it.
Yeah. Right. But this has been awesome, though. Thank you so much for this, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.